Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us in this session of Spokane Public Schools Keep Learning Series for Literacy. Today's lesson is for all our fourth graders out there, and any child who is interested is welcome to join us. My name is Mrs. Bandygraph, and I'm an instructional coach at Cooper Elementary in Spokane Schools, and I will be your teacher for this lesson. I'm so glad you are participating with me today. If you didn't see our previous lessons, you can find them on the KSPS website. You can still tune in to today's lesson, even if you haven't seen any of our others. Today, we will be learning about Cesar Chavez and drawing conclusions about his life and the lives of migrant farm workers during this time. For today's lesson, you will need 1 or 2 pieces of paper and something to write with. I will give you a moment to gather your supplies. Let's get started. Today we will be reading a text called Harvesting Hope, the story of Cesar Chavez. This text is a biography of Cesar's life. A biography is an informational text. It is nonfiction and informs readers about something or someone. Before we begin, let's take a look at our learning target for the lesson. Read it with me. I can use details from a text to draw conclusions. Now, you might be wondering, what does drawing conclusions mean? Or you might remember about learning about this skill in your classroom. A conclusion is an understanding you come to yourself. Authors don't always state things directly. Sometimes you have to draw your own conclusions or inferences. We use details from the text to help us draw conclusions and make generalizations. Today we will mostly focus on drawing conclusions. Our next lesson will focus on making generalizations. Take a look at the graphic organizer on your screen. Go ahead and get a piece of paper to draw boxes like the ones you see here. Label the first box Conclusion, following boxes Text Detail. The first box is where you will write a conclusion you came up with, and the following boxes are for you to write down the details from the text that made you draw the conclusion or make it. We will complete this at the end of the story, but don't worry, we will also complete one together as we read. Let's go over a few vocabulary words that will help us understand the story better. The first word is association. These kids have formed a group or association that cleans up beaches. An association is a group of people that gets things done. The second word is capital. A state capitol is a building where lawmakers can make and change laws. The third word is drought. In the 1930s, a drought or lack of rain made life hard for farmers. A drought is when there's no rain for a long period of time. Publicity. The media can spread publicity or news about events and causes. So publicity is news about something. And the last word is conflicts. Most conflicts or disagreements can be solved by talking things over. Conflicts are disagreements. Remember, before good readers begin to read, they set a purpose, what they want to find out or enjoy in the selection. I know that this is a biography about Cesar Chavez for the rights of migrant workers. I want to find out why Chavez chose to do this and whether he was successful. We will use details from the text to draw conclusions and about Cesar and what was going on during this time. Harvesting Hope, the story of Cesar Chavez, by Kathleen Kroll, illustrated by Yuyi Morales. As a boy, Cesar Chavez lived on his family's big ranch in Arizona. His family had a big house and all the food they could want. Cesar loved to play with his cousins and his brother Richard. He liked to listen to his relatives' tales of life back in Mexico. Then, in 1937, the summer Cesar was 10, the trees around the ranch began to wilt. The sun baked the farm soil rock hard. A drought was choking the life out of Arizona. Without water for the crops, the Chavez family couldn't make money to pay its bills. There came a day when Cesar's mother couldn't stop crying. In a daze, Cesar watched his father strap their possessions onto the roof of their old car. After a long struggle, the family no longer owned the ranch. They had no choice but to join the hundreds of thousands of people fleeing to the green valleys of California to look for work. Cesar's old life had vanished. Now he and his family were migrants, working on other people's farms, crisscrossing California, picking whatever fruits and vegetables were in season. When the Chavez family arrived at the first of their new homes in California, they found a battered old shed. Its doors were missing and garbage covered the dirt floor. Cold, damp air seeped into their bedding and clothes. They shared water and outdoor toilets with a dozen other families, and overcrowding made everything filthy. The neighbors were constantly fighting, and the noise upset Cesar. He had no place to play games with Richard. Meals were sometimes made of dandelion greens gathered along the road. Cesar swallowed his bitter homesickness and worked alongside his family. He was small and not very strong, but still a fierce worker. Nearly every crop caused torment. Yanking out beets broke the skin between his thumb and index finger. Grapevines sprayed with bug-killing chemicals made his eyes sting and his lungs wheeze. Lettuce had to be the worst. Thinning lettuce all day with a short-handled hoe would make hot spasms shoot through his back. Farm chores on someone else's farm instead of his own felt like a form of slavery. The Chavez family talked constantly of saving enough money to buy back their ranch, but by each sundown, the whole family had earned as little as 30 cents for the day's work. As the years blurred together, they spoke of the ranch less and less. The towns weren't much better than the fields. White trade-only signs were displayed in many stores and restaurants. None of the 35 schools Cesar attended over the years seemed like a safe place either. Once, after Cesar broke the rule about speaking English at all times, a teacher hung a sign on him that read, "I am a clown. I speak Spanish." He came to hate school because of the conflicts, though he liked to learn. Even he considered his 8th grade graduation a miracle. After 8th grade, he dropped out to work in the fields full time. His lack of schooling embarrassed Cesar for the rest of his life, but as a teenager, he just wanted to put food on his family's table. As he worked, it disturbed him that his landowners treated their workers more like farm tools than human beings. They provided no clean drinking water, rest periods, or access to bathrooms. Anyone who complained was fired or beaten up. So, like other migrant workers, Cesar was afraid and suspicious whenever outsiders showed up to try to help. How could they know about feeling so powerless? Who could battle such odds? Yet Cesar had never forgotten his old life in Arizona and the jolt he'd felt when it was turned upside down. Farm work did not have to be this miserable. Reluctantly, he started paying attention to the outsiders. He began to think that maybe there was hope, and in his early 20s, he decided to dedicate the rest of his life to fighting for a change. Again, he crisscrossed California, this time to talk people into joining his fight. At first, out of every 100 workers he talked to, perhaps one would agree with him. One by one, this was how he started. At the first meeting Cesar organized, a dozen women gathered. He sat quietly in a corner. After 20 minutes, everyone started wondering when the organizer would show up. Cesar thought he might die of embarrassment. "Well, I'm the organizer," he said, and forced himself to keep talking, hoping to inspire respect with his new suit and the mustache he was trying to grow. The women listened politely, and he was sure they did so out of pity. But despite his shyness, Cesar showed a knack for solving problems. People trusted him. With workers, he was endlessly patient and compassionate. With landowners, he was stubborn, demanding, and single-minded. He was learning to be a fighter. In a fight for justice, he told everyone, truth was a better weapon than violence. Nonviolence, he said, takes more guts. It meant using imagination to find ways to overcome powerlessness. More and more people listened. One night, 150 people poured into an old, abandoned theater in Fresno. At this first meeting of the National Farm Workers Association, Cesar unveiled its flag, a bold black eagle, the sacred bird of the Aztec Indians. La Causa, the cause, was born. It was time to rebel, and the place was Delano. Here in the heart of the lush San Joaquin Valley, brilliant green vineyards reached toward every horizon. Poorly paid workers hunched over grapevines for most of each year. Then, in 1965, the vineyard owners cut their pay even further. Cesar chose to fight just one of the 40 landowners, hopeful that others would get the message. As plump grapes drooped, thousands of workers walked off that company's fields in a strike, or huelga. Grapes, when ripe, do not last long. The company fought back with everything from punches to bullets. Cesar refused to respond with violence. Violence would only hurt La Causa. Instead, he organized a march of more than 300 miles. He and his supporters would walk from Delano to the state capitol in Sacramento to ask for the government's help. Cesar and 67 others started out one morning. Their first obstacle was the Delano police force, 30 of whose members locked arms to prevent the group from crossing the street. After 3 hours of arguing in public, the chief of police backed down. Joyous marchers headed north under the sizzling sun. Their rallying cry was, "Si se puede," or "Yes, it can be done." The first night they reached Ducor. The marchers slept outside the tiny cabin of the only person who would welcome them. Single file, they continued covering an average of 15 miles a day. They inched their way through the San Joaquin Valley, while the unharvested grapes in Delano turned white with mold. Cesar developed painful blisters right away. He and many others had blood seeping out of their shoes. The word spread. Along the way, farm workers offered food and drink as the marchers passed by. When the sun set, marchers lit candles and kept going. Shelter was no longer a problem. Supporters began welcoming them each night with feasts. Every night was a rally. "Our pilgrimage is the match," one speaker shouted, "that will light our cause for all farm workers to see what is happening here." Eager supporters would keep the marchers up half the night talking about change. Every morning the line of marchers swelled, Cesar always in the lead. On the 9th day, hundreds marched through Fresno. The long, peaceful march was a shock to people unaware of how California farm workers had to live. Now students, public officials, religious leaders, and citizens from everywhere offered help. For the grape company, the publicity was becoming unbearable. And on the vines, the grapes continued to rot. In Modesto, on the 15th day, an exhilarated crowd celebrated Cesar's 38th birthday. 2 days later, 5,000 people met the marchers in Stockton with flowers, guitars, and accordions. Let's pause here and use details from the text to draw a conclusion about Cesar Chavez. What conclusion can you draw from what you read? It seems to me that people realized that the farm workers needed support and that their demands were fair. I'm going to write that in the first box as my conclusion. Go ahead and write it down. Let's think about what details from the text made me draw that conclusion. On page 569, we read that the farm workers were given food and drink and supporters gave them feasts. Let's add that to our second box as a text detail. Was there any more information in the text that helped us draw that conclusion? Let's continue looking at page 569. It seems like I read more information on that page that helped me draw that conclusion. Oh yes, right here in the 7th paragraph it says, people were unaware of how farm workers had to live. Now students, public officials, religious leaders, and citizens from everywhere offered help. Let's add this piece of information to our third and final box. We read the text, and it provided us with information or details that made us draw a conclusion about it. Our conclusion was people realized that the farm workers needed support and that their demands were fair. One detail from the text that made us draw that conclusion is that farm workers were offered food and drink and supporters gave peace. Another detail that helped us draw that conclusion is that people were unaware of how farm workers lived, but once they knew, all kinds of people from everywhere helped. This is exactly what you will be doing at the end, but don't worry, I'll still be working with you. Let's continue to read to see what else we come up with. That evening, Cesar received a message that he was sure was a prank, but in case it was true, he left the march and had someone drive him all through the night to a mansion in wealthy Beverly Hills. Officials from the grape company were waiting for him. They were ready to recognize the authority of the National Farm Workers Association, promising a contract with a pay raise and better conditions. Cesar rushed back to join the march. On Easter Sunday, when the marchers arrived in Sacramento, the parade was 10,000 people strong. From the steps of the state capitol building, the joyous announcement was made to the public. Cesar Chavez had just signed the first contract for farm workers in American history. Wow, what an amazing and inspiring biography. Let's recap on what Drawing Conclusions is all about. Harvesting Hope is a biography about the life of Cesar Chavez. The author gives many facts about Cesar, but she doesn't explain everything. She expects readers to figure some things out on their own. When readers do this, it is called drawing a conclusion or inference. In Harvesting Hope, we learn that Cesar Chavez was very good at organizing others. What details and evidence help readers draw this conclusion? The conclusion we're drawing is that Cesar Chavez was very good at organizing others. This tells us he was a good organizer. Now that we've drawn this conclusion, what details and examples in the text do you think led me to that conclusion? On page 566, we learned that he was able to convince farm workers to come to meetings. Let's add that as our first detail. Now, let's look back into the text for our second detail. On page 567, we learned that he started the National Farm Workers Association. It says so here in the 4th paragraph. One night, 150 people poured into an old abandoned theater in Fresno. At this first meeting of the National Farm Workers Association, Cesar unveiled its flag. Let's go ahead and add this as our second detail. The details both support our conclusion that Cesar Chavez was very good at organizing others. We can tell this because he convinced farm workers to come to meetings, and he started the National Farm Workers Association. Today we use details from a text to draw conclusions. We were able to draw conclusions about farm workers and about Cesar Chavez himself. Make sure you store your work in a safe place for our next lesson. I have enjoyed doing some literacy learning with you today. Thank you for joining me as you keep learning from home. I look forward to seeing you here again for our next lesson on KSPS.